My name is Jolene Sims, and at 36 years old, I discovered my own family had been hiding a painful truth from me for years. The same day I lost the biggest business deal of my career, my sister never once asked if I was okay or even if I'd eaten. Instead, the first thing she wanted to know was who would be making her car payment now. My mother quietly agreed with her, acting as though that was the biggest problem in the room. Then my father walked into my old bedroom, reached up to the closet shelf, grabbed a flat cardboard box, and calmly started packing away my clothes. He told me my sister needed the room more than I did. None of them had the slightest idea what I had already built 3 hours away on the coast, or whose name was written on the deed of a small waterfront home. Over the next few weeks, everything they believed would fall apart piece by piece. Welcome back to Diana True Stories, where the quiet ones finally stop sacrificing everything for people who only show up when they need a favor. If you've ever heard a story that made you sit up and pay attention, stay with me, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Now let me take you back to a Friday afternoon in late spring. I own a company called Titleline Property Restoration. We specialize in bringing damaged coastal homes back to life after the ocean has nearly destroyed them. Rotten floor joists, siding ruined by saltwater, foundations weakened by storms. That's the work I've spent years mastering. I started with nothing more than an old pickup truck and a borrowed nail gun, and little by little, I built a successful business. So when my biggest client called that Friday morning and explained that his investor had backed out, I didn't panic. The entire resort restoration project disappeared in a single phone call, taking nearly a quarter of my yearly income with it. I sat quietly in my office overlooking Mara Bay, stared at the numbers on my screen, and finally closed my laptop. I'd rebuilt homes that hurricanes had almost washed into the sea. I could recover from losing one contract. What hurt wasn't the money. It was knowing I wouldn't bother telling my family because they had never cared enough to ask what I actually did for a living. As far as they knew, I just worked construction. It wasn't exactly true, but I never corrected them. That afternoon, I made the same 3-hour drive inland that I made every Friday to the town of Mill Haven, where I grew up. For the past 18 months, I'd been staying in my childhood bedroom while helping take care of my father after his heart attack. My real life remained on the coast, while my responsibilities kept pulling me back home every week. When I turned into the driveway, I immediately noticed 2 unfamiliar vehicles parked outside. My cousin Dell's pickup and the old rusted Charger belonging to my sister Brittany's boyfriend, Cody. In my family, extra cars on a Friday evening usually meant everyone had already made an important decision without bothering to include me. The screen door slammed behind me before I even reached the living room. "So it's true," Brittany called out. "You got fired." She was curled up on the couch scrolling through her phone while Cody sat beside her. My mom occupied her favorite chair, and our neighbor, Mrs. Pruitt, sat near the window sipping sweet tea, pretending she wasn't there to watch the drama unfold. "I wasn't fired," I answered. "My client went bankrupt." "That's different." Brittany didn't care. She turned toward our mother as though I hadn't spoken. "So who's paying my car now, Mom?" That was her first concern. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just the next payment on her car. Mom carefully placed her teacup onto the table and folded her hands with the calm expression she always wore whenever she'd already made up her mind, but wanted it to sound like everyone had a choice. "Now, Jolene," she said softly, "don't upset yourself. We'll figure something out. You always do." Cody smirked while staring at his phone. Across the kitchen doorway, Dell looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite understand. It almost felt like he was trying to warn me. "How did everyone already know about the contract?" "Yes." Brittany shrugged. "Cody's cousin works at the supply yard. News spreads fast. So they'd known for hours. They had all gathered inside this house, discussed my worst day before I even arrived, and somehow the only thing that mattered was figuring out who would continue making Brittany's $300 car payment. "I drove 3 hours to come home," I said quietly, "and you all held a meeting about my paycheck before I even walked through the door." Mom smiled as though I was being unreasonable. "Sit down, sweetheart. You're exhausted." I stayed where I was. A moment later, my dad walked into the room carrying a flat moving box. Without meeting my eyes, he unfolded it and placed it on the coffee table. "Your sister and Cody need an actual bedroom," he said. "They're planning to get married, and it makes more sense for them to have yours." Then my mother calmly delivered the sentence she'd obviously rehearsed. "Your sister needs this house more than you do, Jolene." She spoke gently, somehow making the words hurt even more. Brittany never looked up from her phone. Mrs. Pruitt suddenly became fascinated by the tea in her cup. Dad walked down the hallway toward my room, and I followed him. Without saying a word, I watched him neatly fold my work shirts into the cardboard box. Those were the same hands that had once taught me how to swing a hammer. Now they were quietly packing up the daughter who had spent the last year and a half helping keep this house together. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." From the living room, my mother answered before he could. "You've always landed on your feet." That had always been the family rule. Jolene always manages somehow, so nobody else has to help. I looked into the box and noticed my grandmother's old sewing tin sitting on top, the one she'd given me when I was 12 years old. Picked it up carefully. Then I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and wrapped my fingers around a heavy key ring I'd never explained to anyone in that house. I wasn't about to explain it now. "You're not forcing me out," I said quietly. "I'm choosing to leave." For the first time, Dad looked directly at me. Something flashed across his face for just a second before disappearing. Then Mom sighed. "Don't be so dramatic." Dad lowered his eyes and continued folding clothes. I lifted the box myself, carried it to the front door, and walked out without waiting for anyone to help me. I closed the door behind me, climbed into my truck, and started the 3-hour drive back to the coast that very night. The box slid around on the back seat with every turn. I never cried. I spent the entire drive doing something much more important. I was making plans. By the time I reached the coastline and the salty breeze rolled through my open window, with the lights of Mara Bay glowing beyond the dunes, I'd already mapped out exactly how the next few weeks would unfold. My apartment was above a small bait shop just a couple of blocks from the beach. A mile farther down the road stood my office, a renovated boathouse with my company's sign hanging proudly out front, a sign I'd paid for with my own hard-earned money. This was the life I'd built for myself, a life my family had never cared enough to see. My business partner, Renata Vance, was still working when I arrived close to 10 that night. That wasn't unusual. Whenever a major contract collapsed, she stayed until the job was figuring out its next move. The second she noticed the cardboard box in my hands, she placed her coffee on the desk. "So, you finally walked away from that house," she said. I gave a tired smile. "They were the ones who let me go. I just stopped fighting it." For the past year, Renata had been urging me to spend less time in Mill Haven. She'd watched me transfer money home, pay bills that weren't mine, drive 6 hours every weekend, and return looking more exhausted than when I'd left. "Good," she replied. "Now what are you going to do?" I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the box on my desk and stared at it. Resting beneath my grandmother's sewing tin was a folder I'd kept hidden in a locked drawer, carrying it back and forth like a secret nobody else knew existed. Renata noticed where my eyes landed. "Is it finally time?" she asked. I wasn't sure yet. But for the first time in 18 months, I felt the weight I'd been dragging loosen, as if the rope I'd been pulling had finally slipped free. To understand that moment, you need to know how I ended up carrying that box in the first place. 18 months earlier, my father suffered a heart attack right in the driveway. I got the call while I was working on a job site and drove 3 straight hours without stopping. After that day, I never truly moved back to the coast. Someone needed to keep everything running while Dad recovered. And in my family, someone had always meant me. Mom never had a job. Brittany bounced from one position to another, quitting before she could ever be fired. So I moved back into my childhood bedroom and quietly took responsibility for everything. I caught up the overdue property taxes that no one had mentioned. I paid the missing balance on the homeowner's insurance. When Brittany wanted a newer car but couldn't qualify for financing, Mom slid the paperwork across the table and handed me a pen. I co-signed because I knew if the loan went unpaid, my credit, the same credit my business depended on, would take the hit. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I simply couldn't stand watching something collapse when I knew I could keep it standing. Maybe that was my biggest weakness. Fix things. I'd rather carry the burden myself than waste time arguing over whose responsibility it should be. I kept telling myself it would only be temporary. The day I signed for Brittany's car, I made one condition. After 6 months, the payments are yours. Mom brushed it aside. She's just getting back on her feet. The truth was, Brittany never had to stand on her own because someone always caught her before she could fall. Meanwhile, everyone assumed I didn't need anyone. In that house, being called the strong one really meant being the person nobody ever worried about. Every Friday, I drove those same 3 hours convincing myself that family was worth every sacrifice. I believed that. Right up until the night they packed my belongings into a cardboard box. People always ask me why my mother favored Brittany. The answer isn't as simple as it sounds. Before Brittany was born, my mother lost 2 pregnancies. She rarely spoke about them, but years ago my grandmother quietly told me the story. Then Brittany arrived. She was born early, tiny, and survived against difficult odds. From that day forward, Mom promised herself Brittany would never go without anything. She built her entire life around protecting her youngest daughter. Somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that I was the strong child, the one who didn't need comforting. I understand why she became that way. Understanding it never made it hurt any less. Dad carried his own scars. His father had been loud, demanding, and impossible to please. He learned as a boy that peace only came by agreeing with the loudest person in the room. Home. That person was always my mother, so Dad rarely defended me. He simply stayed quiet and did whatever she expected, including packing my shirts into boxes without saying a word. The one person who always saw me for who I really was my grandmother, Nana Marlene. When I was little, she'd pull me close and whisper, "You were never the strong one to me, sweetheart. You were just the one who always showed up." She was living in the back bedroom of the Mill Haven house now, turning 80 the following month. Her world had shrunk to a recliner beside a window. She'd already lost the only home she'd ever truly loved years earlier, and I think that loss stole a piece of her spirit. If I'm honest, she was the real reason I kept making that long drive every weekend. Not my mother. Not my father. Only the elderly woman in the back room who still remembered to make me feel like I mattered. That first night back in Mara Bay, sleep never came. I sat alone at my kitchen table with my laptop and a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. One by one, I started cutting every thread that tied me to that house. The automatic payments for the property taxes. Cancelled. The homeowner's insurance. Cancelled. Both disappeared with 2 simple clicks. Then I opened the account for Brittany's car. I'd been quietly making those payments myself. That ended the same night. I knew I couldn't remove myself from the loan just because I wanted to. The only proper solution would be for Brittany to refinance it in her own name. One after another. Crossed them all off. Took about an hour. When I finished, the invisible system I'd been keeping alive for that household no longer existed. They pushed me out of the house before sunset. By midnight, the support they'd been standing on had already disappeared beneath them. They simply hadn't realized it yet. I wasn't trying to get revenge. I was simply done pretending I could hold up a house after I'd already walked away from it. A wall can't support a room once it's been removed. Before going to bed, I unlocked the folder I'd carried back from Mill Haven. Inside was a property deed dated 3 years earlier. It belonged to a small beach house sitting 40 minutes farther up the coast. The owner's name on that deed was mine. I'd never told Brittany. I'd never told my mother. I'd never even told my father. I slowly ran my fingers across the address, the same way someone gently touches an old photograph they never want to lose. She'd never qualify. So I did the only honest thing left. I told her the payments were now completely her responsibility. If she stopped paying, my credit would suffer too. I accepted that risk. I'd rather take one financial hit than spend the next 15 years carrying someone else's burden. Next, I wrote down every bill, expense, and responsibility I'd silently been covering. Closed the folder, set it aside, and finally went to bed. The truth about a house is that it never collapses overnight. First, one payment gets missed. Then a warning letter shows up. Before long, the phone starts ringing in a kitchen 3 hours away. And someone who's never handled the bills suddenly realizes they have no idea what has been keeping the roof over their head. Let me pause for a moment. A lot of people have told me I seemed heartless that night. Maybe that's true. But I'd spent the previous 18 months pouring everything I had into a home where all the warmth was saved for everyone except me. If you've ever been the person holding an entire family together until you finally broke under the weight, then you already know exactly how I felt as I drove away. Stay with me, because this is where everything begins to change. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. For the next 2 days, the house in Mill Haven was completely quiet. No phone call from my mother. No message from my father. The only thing I saw was Brittany posting a picture of my old bedroom online with a caption celebrating that she finally had her own space. I didn't respond. Instead, I buried myself in work. That's always been how I deal with pain. I cover it with responsibilities. Renata and I started taking on smaller restoration projects to make up for the income we'd lost from the resort contract. A duplex damaged by a storm. A widow's porch that was one strong wind away from collapsing. Simple, honest jobs that paid the bills and kept us moving. On the third morning, my cousin Dell called. Out of everyone in my family, Dell was the only one who ever spoke honestly, even when nobody wanted to hear it. "Hey," he said. "Thought you should know. A letter came for your parents today. It had the bank's logo on it. Your mom's been staring at it for hours." "What kind of letter?" "I think it's about a home equity line." She looks scared, Jolene. "She keeps asking your dad what it means, but he doesn't know either." A cold feeling settled deep in my chest. What home equity line? Dell suddenly went quiet. "Wait. You don't know. Dell. What home equity line? I honestly thought you were the one who arranged it." My stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated before answering. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this. But your mom mentioned your name. Somehow you're connected to it." I thanked him, ended the call, and sat there without moving. There was a piece of this story I hadn't seen yet. Somehow, my name was attached to it. Before long, I'd discover that the people who threw me out of their house had been relying on me in ways I'd never agreed to. And in places I had never even thought to check. That afternoon, Brittany called. I almost ignored it. But some small part of me still hoped she'd ask if I was okay. "Hey," she said. "So, my insurance payment is due on Monday. Can you take care of it? And Mom says the water heater's making weird noises, so that'll probably need fixing too." No greeting. No apology. Not even a simple, "How are you?" Every sentence somehow ended with a bill. "Brittany," I said, "do you even know where I am right now?" "I don't know. Somewhere by the beach. I'm 3 hours away. And I'm no longer paying everyone's expenses." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. In the background, I could hear Cody whispering something. "Don't act like this," Brittany finally said. "You're always the one who handles everything. I handled it because nobody else would. That doesn't mean it was ever my responsibility. So you're really going to let my car get repossessed because your feelings are hurt?" I nearly laughed. "I'm not your personal bank, Brittany. I never was." Cody's voice became louder behind her. "Ask her about the other thing," he said. Brittany immediately tried to quiet him. But I'd already heard enough. "The other thing? What other thing?" "Oh, nothing," Brittany answered far too quickly. "Forget it." Then she hung up. I placed my phone on my desk and stared at it for a long time. For 15 years, my family had handed me the same role. The dependable daughter. The emergency paycheck. The person everyone leaned on whenever life became difficult. Now that I'd finally stepped away, they couldn't understand why the story wasn't unfolding the way they expected. The problem was, someone had written my name into a chapter one had never agreed to. And thanks to Cody's careless comment, I just realized there was another secret waiting to be uncovered. That night I sent the message I should have written years earlier. Short, direct, nothing left to debate. I sent it to all three of them at the same time. The property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, and the car I had co-signed for. All of it officially ended that day. I sent them the exact cutoff date along with the bank's contact information. Nothing more. No apology. No long explanation about how much it hurt. I'd learned years ago that people who expect you to suffer in silence aren't moved by your pain. They're only moved when the consequences finally reach them. Before pressing send, I typed one last sentence. Asterisk family isn't a monthly payment. It's an open door. And I'm done holding it open for people who only show up when they need something. Asterisk I never actually sent those words. I only needed to read them once in my own handwriting before deleting them. Then I sent the rest of the message and placed my phone face down on the table. The following morning, Renata read it over my shoulder. No soft edges, she said with a nod. Good. They're going to paint you as the bad guy. They can, I replied. I've been carrying that family for 15 years. It's their turn to hold up the roof. And I meant every word. Oh. I knew my mother well enough to know she wouldn't make this about money. She'd make it about love. She'd turn financial boundaries into emotional betrayal because guilt had always been the language that worked on me. For 15 years. I'd always answered it. As I watched the tide roll away from the boathouse that morning, I found myself wondering whether it would still work this time. The answer came before noon. Mom called 6 times before I finally answered. She didn't start by mentioning the bills. She went straight for my heart. After everything this family has done for you, she snapped. This is how you repay us? I took a slow breath. What exactly has this family done for me, Mom? Silence. She had no answer. Because there wasn't one. You've always landed on your feet, Jolene, she finally said, repeating the same line I'd heard my entire life. Your sister needs us more than you do. Why are you doing this to her? There it was again. The sentence she'd used for years to make my life seem invisible. I'm not doing anything to Brittany, I answered calmly. I've simply stopped doing everything for her. That's not the same thing. She could lose her car. Then she can start making the payments herself. That's what adults do. Right on cue, my mother's voice broke into tears. She could cry almost instantly whenever she needed to. I lost 2 babies, Jolene. You don't know what it's like to almost lose a child. It was the truest thing she'd ever said. And the one she'd used against me for years. I do understand, Mom, I said quietly. I've understood my entire life. That's why I drove back and forth every weekend for 18 months. But your grief isn't a debt I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life paying. She went silent again. Then she said the sentence that told me exactly what she planned to do next. We'll celebrate your grandmother's birthday without you. Nana's 80th birthday. The entire family had been planning it. And somehow my mother had already turned it into another weapon. After hanging up, I sat there for a long time. That's when an idea I'd been afraid to face for nearly 3 years quietly began taking shape. 2 days later, I drove back to Mill Haven. Not for my parents. Not for Brittany. Came for Nana. I slipped in through the side entrance that led straight toward the back room so I wouldn't have to walk through the living room. Nana Marlene was sitting in her favorite recliner beside the window with a quilt across her knees. She looked even smaller than the last time I'd seen her. The moment she noticed me, her whole face brightened. There she is, she smiled. My girl. I pulled up a chair beside her and gently held her hand. Her skin had become as delicate as paper. For a while we talked about simple things. The birds visiting her feeder. Television show she liked. The weather outside. Then she grew quiet and stared through the window at the gray Mill Haven sky. 80 years, she whispered. Can you believe it? What do you want for your birthday? Asked. She smiled softly. It was the smile of someone remembering something they could never get back. I only ever had one house that truly felt like home, she said. It was the one by the water. Your grandfather and I bought it the year we got married. We lost it when life turned against us. I'd heard the story before, but never with so much longing in her voice. The ocean took a lot from me. But that porch. I used to sit there every evening watching the sun disappear into the water. For a little while, I believed nothing could ever take that away. She squeezed my hand. It's funny what matters most when life is almost over. I didn't tell her what I already knew. Not yet. Instead, I stayed beside her until the afternoon light faded. On my drive back to the coast, I called my attorney. There was a legal document I'd wanted to prepare for 3 years. I just never found the courage. The house Nana lost was the same house I'd secretly bought back. She never knew. 3 years earlier it had appeared in a county auction. The place was falling apart. The porch leaned toward the sand. The roof was failing. Most people saw a wreck. I emptied my savings and saw home. After 3 years of restoration, I had finally reached the original structure hidden beneath decades of cheap repairs. The old interior walls hadn't been opened since my grandparents built the house. Every owner after them had only fixed what people could see. Fresh paint, cheap flooring, new fixtures. Nobody had ever repaired the heart of the house. The day after visiting Nana, I went back to continue the restoration. Pulling rotten wood apart has always been strangely peaceful for me. I was removing an old wall beside the chimney when something suddenly dropped from inside the cavity and slammed onto the wooden floor. It was an old coffee tin. Rust covered every edge. The kind nobody makes anymore. I sat down right there and carefully pried the lid open. Inside were faded photographs with curled yellow edges. Pictures of my grandparents when they were young. Nana smiling. Grandpa with his arm around her. The porch behind them looking brand new. Beneath the photographs rested a folded piece of paper that had become stiff with age. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Nana. Across the top were the words, "Things I want before I go." My heartbeat slowed as I unfolded the page. Most of the list was simple. See all the cousins one last time. Make peace with Wayne. And at the very top, underlined twice so deeply the pen had nearly torn through the paper. Watch one more sunset from the porch of a house that's mine. She had hidden that little tin inside the wall when the house was first built. It stayed there through foreclosure, through different owners, through years of neglect, waiting quietly in the darkness because nobody had ever cared enough to strip the house back to its bones. Until I did. I remained sitting on that wooden floor as the evening sun poured orange light through the salty air. The last rays of sunlight stretched through the weathered window as I carefully folded Nana's list and placed it back inside the old coffee tin. At that moment everything became clear. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I knew exactly where it would happen. I stepped onto the porch I'd rebuilt with my own hands, watched the ocean fade into darkness, and called my attorney. I want to create a life estate, I told her. My grandmother will have the right to live in this house for the rest of her life. She won't pay rent. There won't be any conditions. I'll keep ownership, but as long as she's alive, this is her home. My attorney explained every step. It was simple. It was completely legal. And most importantly, no one could talk me out of it because the house belonged to me. I'd earned it through years of hard work. Nobody had given it to me. Now I was choosing to give the best part of it to the only person who had ever truly given anything to me. I decided Nana's 80th birthday would be celebrated right there on that porch. At the very house she'd lost years ago. Without realizing it had quietly come back to her. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she recognized where she was. As for the family who packed my belongings into cardboard boxes, they could learn the truth the same way everyone else would. When they arrived, that very night I started making plans. I booked a caterer, reserved tables and chairs, ordered strings of lights to hang beneath the roofline. When Renata heard what I was doing, she stared at me. "So you're throwing a party for the people who kicked you out?" Smiled. "I'm throwing a party for my grandmother. They just happened to be invited." Right then my phone buzzed. A new event inquiry had arrived through the Titterline website. Whenever the beach house wasn't being renovated, I quietly rented it out for small gatherings. Someone wanted to reserve it for a family celebration. I almost approved it without looking. Then I noticed the name. Carol Sims. Froze. I read it again. And then a third time. My own mother was trying to rent my beach house for Nana's 80th birthday. She'd searched online for the perfect place to impress the family, church friends and relatives. Without realizing the website had suggested the very house that belonged to me. She didn't even recognize it. The photographs showed a beautifully restored beachfront home. Nothing like the neglected property she'd remembered losing years ago. Renata leaned over my shoulder and quietly laughed. "She's trying to rent your house. For the same party you're already planning. In the house her own mother lost," I added. "And she has no idea I own it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It almost felt too unbelievable to be real. The woman who'd told me my sister deserved a house more than I did was now offering to pay me so she could use a house she never imagined belonged to me. Part of me wanted to answer immediately. I could have replied with a single sentence. Asterisk, "You can't rent property that's already mine." Asterisk, I could have watched her panic through a text message. But a text felt far too small. What she'd done to me hadn't been private. She'd humiliated me in front of neighbors. She'd packed my clothes into boxes while people watched. If the truth was going to come out, it deserved witnesses too. "Don't answer yet," I told Renata. "I need to think." Deep down, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I just needed to make sure I had the courage to follow through. Before I could finish planning, my phone rang again. It was Dell. This time his voice sounded tense. "I found out what that letter from the bank was about," he said. "And you're not going to like it." My stomach tightened. "Tell me." "It turns out that 2 years ago your mom opened a home equity line against the Mill Haven house. For Brittany. For Brittany. Cody. His truck. That business idea. And the wedding they've been talking about." Felt sick. How did she even qualify? Dell hesitated. "Because she didn't. She used your information." The room went silent. She'd kept copies of every document I'd ever signed. The paperwork from Brittany's car loan. My social security number. My income records. Even old signatures. She used them to forge my name onto the loan application. I never saw the paperwork. I never signed anything. But according to the bank, I was listed as one of the borrowers. And now the loan had fallen behind. The house itself had been used as collateral. And legally, my name was tied to the debt. Looking back now, this is the part 1 replay more than anything else. Because there had been a warning. About a year earlier, an unfamiliar letter from a lender had arrived at the Mill Haven house addressed to me. I asked my mother what it was. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing more than junk mail, a random pre-approved offer that didn't matter. Even so, I called the number printed on the letter. Instead of answers, I was passed from one department to another. When I asked them to remove my name, they explained that the account holder had to appear in person and sign the request. According to their records, the account holder was my mother. She never showed up. That's when I realized what had happened. I noticed the smoke. I tried to sound the alarm. But every door leading to the truth had already been locked. I sat there holding my phone while the full reality finally settled in. The very house I had been pushed out of had been standing on my name all along. I didn't panic. Panic belongs to people who don't understand how foundations are built. The following morning I called my attorney again, and we approached the situation the same way I'd handle any major restoration project. Carefully, step by step, starting from the ground up. We requested copies of every loan document. We compared the signature on the application with my genuine signature. The forgery was obvious. Then we matched every date on the paperwork with records showing where I'd actually been. After that came the less glamorous but necessary work. We filed a written fraud dispute with the lender, completed an identity theft affidavit, submitted a police report in the county where the loan had been processed. My attorney looked at me honestly. "This is a strong fraud case," she said. "But the bank still has to conduct its own investigation, and that could take months. They won't simply transfer the debt to whoever spent the money overnight. What we're doing is challenging whether you're legally responsible for any of it. If the forged signature is confirmed, your name comes off the loan, and the bank goes after the people who actually signed the documents." I sat quietly, realizing what that meant. I was officially accusing my own mother of forging my identity. A year earlier, I would have swallowed the debt myself just to keep the peace. That's what I'd always done. Not anymore. "File everything," I said. So we did. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It was slow, careful work built on facts instead of emotions. That's the kind of fight I trust because tears can't erase paperwork. Soon enough, my mother would receive another letter. This one informing her that the loan was under investigation for fraud, and that the daughter she'd relied on for years was no longer carrying the burden in silence. I didn't celebrate. I simply filed each document, checked every deadline, and slept better than I had in years. There's a certain kind of peace that comes from finally fixing the problem that actually matters instead of the one everyone expects you to solve. Once that was underway, I turned my attention back to Nana's birthday. I had Renata reply to my mother's booking request through Titaline's business account. The email came from the company. My name appeared nowhere. The cottage was available on the date she'd requested. The message explained that our event coordinator would handle the remaining details. Mom happily paid the deposit without asking a single question. She never once wondered who owned the property. People like my mother rarely ask who's supporting the weight beneath them. They simply assume it will always be there. Now the entire family was preparing to travel to the coast to celebrate Nana's 80th birthday. On my property, standing on my porch, without the slightest idea who actually owned it. I let them reserve the house. I simply chose not to tell them whose house it was. Renata looked at me in disbelief. "You're really going to let them decorate your home thinking it's just a rental?" Smiled. "I'm going to let them believe my mother planned something wonderful. And then, I'm going to tell the truth. In front of everyone whose opinion matters to her. That had always been the plan." Mom specialized in public humiliation. Packing my clothes in front of the neighbors. Holding family meetings behind my back. Making sure everyone watched. So I wasn't planning a shouting match. I wasn't planning a scene. I was planning the truth. Only, clearly, in front of witnesses she couldn't manipulate afterward. For the next 2 weeks, I finished restoring the cottage. I installed a brand new porch railing. Covered the exterior in fresh white paint. Then I carved a small wooden sign for the front entrance. For now, I kept it hidden beneath a cloth. Everything was ready. Nana still had no idea. My mother knew nothing. The only people who understood what was coming were me, Renata, and my attorney, who was preparing one final legal document. About a week before the party, my father called. He almost never called me. For a moment, I barely recognized his number. "Jolene," he said. Then came a long silence. The kind he always filled rooms with. "I know that night wasn't right. The box. I shouldn't have packed your things." Waited. I'd spent 18 months hoping to hear him speak one honest sentence. I wasn't about to interrupt him now. "Your mother said it was best for everyone," he continued quietly. "So I went along with it. I always do. That's just who I am." "It is," I answered. Not cruelly. Just honestly. He sighed. "There was another letter about the house. About that loan. Your mother won't tell me what's in it." Closed my eyes. "Ask her, Dad. It's her loan. She says your name's on it." "It is. Because she put it there without asking me." The silence that followed lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally he whispered, "I didn't know." "I believe you," I replied. "You never know what's really happening in that house. You've made sure of that." It was painful to say, but it was the truth. After another long pause, he asked quietly, "Are you coming to your grandmother's birthday?" I looked toward the ocean outside my window. "Oh, I'll be there," I said. "More than you realize." I didn't explain any further. He wasn't ready to hear the rest. And honestly, neither was I. But for the first time in a very long while, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But I finally felt a small crack in the wall. A tiny opening where a man who had spent his entire life staying silent and following everyone else might, for once, decide to stand on his own. After we ended the call, I went back to sanding the porch railing. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself a little hope. Just a little. Hope costs far less than disappointment, and I figured I could afford that much. That same week, the consequences I'd set in motion began reaching Mill Haven. Dell kept me updated without me even asking. The first domino to fall was Brittany's SUV. On Tuesday afternoon, a tow truck pulled into the driveway and hauled it away while Brittany stood on the porch wearing her robe, shouting at a repossession driver who'd clearly heard far worse. The payments were 2 months overdue. There was no one left quietly covering them. Now she had to ride everywhere with Mom like a teenager who'd just lost her license. Then the notices about the home equity loan started arriving one after another. With the account officially under fraud investigation and my name no longer silently carrying the burden, the bank's letters landed directly in my parents' mailbox. Investigators started asking my mother questions she couldn't answer. The bank wanted money they didn't have. Dell later told me Mom called him crying. "Look what Jolene's done to us." "God bless Dell," he answered with one simple sentence. "Aunt Carol. Jolene didn't take out that loan. She hung up on him." Meanwhile, Cody noticed the money had stopped flowing. He started coming around less often. Talk of the wedding slowly disappeared. Watching everything unfold from 3 hours away brought feelings I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't revenge. It felt more like standing back and watching a building collapse after warning everyone for years that its foundation was failing. I hadn't knocked it down. I simply stopped being the wall holding it up. "You okay with all this?" Dell asked during one of our calls. "I'm fine," I answered. Then I stopped myself. That word had followed me my entire life. Fine. The word everyone used whenever they wanted to ignore what I was carrying. "No," I corrected myself. "I'm better than fine. For the first time in years. I'm not the thing falling apart." Dell chuckled. "Save me a seat at the party." "You'll have a front row seat," I told him. "You've earned it." There was one thing I could have done. I could have called my mother. Explained the fraud investigation. Told her about the beach house. Warned her what was waiting at Nana's birthday. Chose not to. Some people only start listening when silence finally becomes expensive. If you've ever stopped explaining yourself on purpose, then you already know exactly what I mean. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And stay with me, because the party is almost here. And so is the moment nobody could have predicted. During the final week before the celebration, I practically moved into the beach house. I finished every last detail. The porch railing. The fresh coat of white paint. The windows, polished until every trace of salt disappeared and they reflected the evening light like mirrors. Renata hung strings of lights beneath the roof. The caterer confirmed everything. I ordered Nana's favorite lemon cake. The small wooden sign I'd carved by hand remained hidden beneath a cloth, waiting for the right moment. The cottage no longer resembled the broken-down house my family remembered. It didn't even look like a rental anymore. It looked exactly what it had become. A home that had been loved back to life. The evening before the party, I stood alone on the porch watching the sun disappear over the water. Exactly the sunset Nana had written about on that old piece of paper. I tried imagining the look on her face when she saw it again. Inside the house, I placed the old coffee tin on the fireplace mantel. Beside it stood the faded photographs of my grandparents. The folded wish list rested safely inside the tin, exactly where Nana had hidden it decades earlier. Part of me hoped she'd discover it herself. The property deed remained inside a folder in my truck. Witnessed. The life estate completed. Everything was finally ready. My mother believed she'd rented a beautiful venue. Brittany thought she was simply attending a birthday party. Relatives were driving in from counties all over the state. Not one of them knew the truth. They were about to celebrate inside a house secretly rescued and restored by the daughter they'd pushed out with a cardboard box. And the guest of honor was about to receive the one dream she'd written down and hidden inside a wall over 50 years earlier. That night I slept at the cottage. Before sunrise, I woke to the steady sound of waves rolling onto the shore. I lay there listening. The tide kept coming. Strong, steady, certain. For the first time in years. I wasn't afraid. The morning of the party, my mother called again. This time the performance sounded different. The panic in her voice wasn't entirely fake. "The bank says they're going to take the house," she whispered. "They're saying the loan's in default. They told me you filed some kind of fraud complaint. You have to fix this. You have to help us." "I didn't take out that loan, Mom." "You did. You just used my name. I only did it for your sister. For the family. You did it without my permission. And now you expect me to pay for it. We're going to lose the house." I took a slow breath. "You already told me Brittany needed that house more than I did. So I left it for her. I'm only respecting the choice you made." Silence filled the line. Then she reached for the same sentence she'd used my entire life. The one she always believed would make me give in. "You've always landed on your feet, Jolene. You can survive this. We can't." I didn't answer right away. I simply let the silence speak for me. "I'll see you at the party, Mom," I said quietly. "I think you're going to find it something you'll never forget." She didn't hear the meaning behind those words. She was too busy being angry, scared, and convinced that I was the one in the wrong. "At least you're showing up for your grandmother," she shot back. There it was again. Another reminder, as if I'd ever failed to be there for my family. I ended the call and finished packing the truck. The folder holding the deed. The cloth that would come off the wooden sign already hanging beside the front door. Then I drove the 40 minutes up the coast with the windows rolled down, the ocean breeze filling the cab. For the first time in years I felt steady. Today the truth would finally have its moment. I reached the cottage nearly 2 hours before everyone else. The catering crew was arranging tables across the lawn that stretched toward the dunes. The string lights waited quietly for sunset. Inside, the old photographs rested on the mantel beside the rusty coffee tin. I opened the folder one last time. A deed. The life estate paperwork. My grandmother's full name printed neatly across the top. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Renata stepped onto the porch beside me. "Are you really sure you want to do this in front of everybody?" she asked. "It could get ugly." "It already got ugly," I answered. "They packed my belongings into a cardboard box in front of a neighbor. I'm only finishing the conversation where they started it." She nodded. "So what's your plan?" "I don't need one. No speech. No drama. I'll let Mom do what she always does. She'll take credit for this place. She'll play the perfect hostess. And when she's standing in the middle of her own story, I'll simply tell everyone the truth. Then I'll give Nana her porch back." Renata studied my face. "And the rest of the family. They'll learn exactly what they are. Guests. Not owners. Not future heirs. Just guests. They're welcome today because Nana loves them. But the door I've held open with my back for 15 years closes today." I wasn't angry. People never seemed to believe that part. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't rehearsing clever lines. I was calm. Calm like the tide. Certain. Unstoppable. The first cars rolled up shortly after 4. Doors slammed. Voices drifted across the gravel. I straightened my shirt, picked up the folder and walked toward the driveway. My grandmother deserved to be greeted first. Everyone else could wait. They wheeled Nana slowly up the path in a borrowed chair, a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders. I watched her expression the entire time. She kept staring at the cottage, as though trying to remember something she'd almost forgotten. Then she saw the porch, the white railing, the polished windows, the lights. She froze. Her hand covered her mouth. "Wayne," she whispered to my father. "This is..." She couldn't finish. "This is my house." The cousins continued toward the food, completely unaware of what had just happened. But my father stopped moving. He had spent his childhood visiting that porch. He looked at the house, then at me. Something crossed his face that I'd never seen before. Recognition. My mother came walking up in her nicest dress, already smiling for everyone watching. "Isn't it beautiful, Mama?" she called proudly. "I found this place just for you." Nana never even looked at her. She was staring at the carved wooden sign beside the front door. I'd uncovered it that morning. Marlene's porch. Her own name carved into cedar. It looked as though it had always belonged there. "Who did this?" Nana whispered. "Who brought my home back?" Around us the party carried on. Children laughed. Ice rattled in coolers. The caterer called for someone to help with the cake. But on that porch, time had stopped. My grandmother stood with tears in her eyes. My father had gone completely pale. And my mother had finally begun to realize that reality wasn't following the script she'd imagined. "Mama," she said again, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "I rented it for you." That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I walked down the steps. Shaken but determined to regain control, my mother did what she'd always done. She filled the silence with herself. Turning toward the cousins, the church friends, Aunt Retha, and everyone gathered on the lawn, she raised her voice with practiced confidence. "I wanted Mama's 80th birthday to be unforgettable," she announced proudly. "So I found this beautiful place by the water. It wasn't easy, but nothing is too good for my mother." Several people clapped. Brittany smiled proudly beside Cody. The fear from that morning's call with the bank had disappeared beneath the applause. This was where my mother felt strongest. Being admired, being praised, being seen as the one who provided. The very woman who had told me my sister deserved a house more than I did, was now accepting compliments inside a home she had no idea belonged to me. "I spent months planning this," she continued. "I just wanted everyone to feel like family." Nana never took her eyes off the wooden sign. My father still hadn't moved. Across the lawn, Del caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, like someone bracing for a wave he knew was coming. I waited. I let my mother keep talking. I let everyone settle into the story she wanted them to believe. I let her become the center of attention, certain she was the hero, certain she'd won. Then, when she finally paused, I stepped into the middle of the lawn where every single person could see me. In a calm voice that didn't need to be loud, I said, "Mom, you didn't rent this house." The entire yard fell silent. It was the kind of silence that comes just before the ocean pulls back and a wave begins to rise. My mother's smile remained for a split second, then slowly faded. She stared at me. "What are you talking about?" "I did rent it," my mother insisted. "I paid the deposit." "You did," I replied. "But the company you booked through belongs to me." "Titterline. The company you paid. It's my business, Mom. And this," I looked around at the restored beach house, "is my home." No one moved. The cousins stared from my mother to me, realizing they'd just stepped into a story far bigger than a birthday party. "I bought this place 3 years ago," I said calmly, letting every sentence settle before speaking again. "It came up for auction after years of sitting abandoned. It was the same house Nana and Grandpa lost when life fell apart. It was barely standing. I emptied my savings to buy it. And every weekend since, I've rebuilt it with my own hands. Those weekends you all thought I was away working. I was here. My mother's lips trembled. That's impossible. You work construction. I own a restoration company, I answered. I've owned it for years. You just never asked. None of you ever cared what I actually did. You only cared what I could do for you. As soon as the truth left my mouth, the ground beneath my mother's story disappeared. She exploded. You bought our family's house and kept it a secret. You let me stand here looking like a fool. After everything we did for you. After we raised you. This is revenge. The relatives watched her unravel. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. The louder she became, the weaker her story sounded. This isn't revenge, Mom. It's the truth. And it's finally standing somewhere you can't talk your way around it. I walked over to Nana's chair and knelt beside her, holding the folder in my hands. Every eye on the lawn followed me. Nana, I said softly, I brought your home back. And I'm not giving it to you for one afternoon. I opened the folder and placed the documents in her hands. The life estate. Her full name printed clearly across the page. This means you can live here for the rest of your life. No rent. No conditions. The porch. The sunsets. The home you loved. They're yours again. Exactly the way you wished. The way you wrote it on that piece of paper hidden inside the wall. Her hands shook as she read the document. Then she read it again. She pressed the papers against her chest. A sound escaped her that was half laughter, half tears. My house, she whispered. My home. My own home. Behind me, my mother finally found her voice again. You can't just do this. We're family. That house should. She couldn't even finish. Even the cousins looked uncomfortable hearing the entitlement out loud. Then she reached for the sentence she'd used against me my entire life. You've always landed on your feet, Jolene. I looked her straight in the eyes. This time, the words had no power. I did land on my feet. Right here. On the porch of the house you pushed me away from. The lawn stayed completely silent. You told me Brittany deserved a house more than I did. You were wrong. You were wrong about the house. And you were wrong about the person. Nana needed this place far more than anyone else ever did. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then Nana slowly lifted her head. Still holding the deed against her chest, she looked directly at her daughter. Her voice was quiet, but every person on that lawn heard it. Carol. Enough. This girl gave me my porch back. Now let her finish. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had nothing to say. The image she'd spent years building collapsed right there in front of everyone she'd hoped to impress. Aunt Retha broke the silence. Carol. What's this I'm hearing about a loan against the house? My mother flinched. The whispers spread through the crowd almost instantly. The cousins exchanged confused looks. Brittany realized the mood had changed and tried to shift the blame. This isn't fair. You're humiliating us at Nana's birthday. I shook my head. I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm telling the truth. And in this family, people have confused those two things for a very long time. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Cody slowly backing toward the parking area. Suddenly his phone had become the most important thing in the world. Funny how quickly people disappear when the money does. Then someone else moved. My father. The man who had spent more than 60 years avoiding conflict. The man who always stayed quiet. Who packed boxes instead of asking questions. He walked past my mother without saying a word. He stopped beside Nana. Placed one hand gently on her shoulder. Then he looked directly at me. His voice was rough. Barely above a whisper. She's right. Jolene's right. About all of it. It wasn't a long speech. It didn't erase the past. But after a lifetime of silence, it was enough to change everything. Came 30 years too late. But it still mattered. My mother turned toward my father as though he had betrayed her. This time, he didn't lower his eyes. He didn't give in. He didn't stay silent. "Carol," he said calmly. "Enough." It was the very first time in my life I'd ever heard him say that word to her. Enough. The party didn't exactly end. Simply unraveled. The cousins slowly wandered toward the cake, unsure where to look. Aunt Retha kept asking my mother questions she couldn't answer, and I remained beside Nana's chair. My father's hand rested gently on the back of it beside mine. Together, the three of us looked out across the water while, behind us, the family I'd spent 15 years holding together quietly collapsed beneath the weight of its own choices. As evening settled in, people began leaving. The cousins drifted away in small groups. Several stopped beside me before heading to their cars. Some squeezed my hand. Others simply nodded. More than a few looked at my mother very differently than they had just a few hours earlier. Brittany left with Cody. 10 minutes later she walked back. He'd driven away without her. She sat quietly on the porch steps for a while, staring out at the ocean. Before leaving with my parents, she finally spoke. I didn't know about the loan. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first honest sentence she'd spoken to me in years. My parents returned to Mill Haven that night. For the first time they would have to deal with that house using their own names, their own money, and their own decisions. The fraud investigation continued for months. Nothing about it was guaranteed. But one thing had changed forever. I was no longer carrying it for them. Whatever they had signed, they would answer for themselves. After everyone left, I stayed behind with Nana. When the last car disappeared down the gravel drive, I rolled her chair to the edge of the porch. Together we watched the sun slowly sink into the water. Golden light spread across the bay. The deed never left her lap. After a long silence she smiled. My first sunset that's truly mine. It only took 80 years. It's yours now, I whispered. And every sunset after this one. She reached over and held my hand. We watched the light fade together. Neither of us spoke again. There wasn't anything left that needed saying. Nana stayed in the cottage. I kept ownership just as we'd planned. Most weekends, I drove up the coast to visit her. The drive felt completely different now. The road no longer led to people who needed something from me. It led to someone who was simply happy to see me. By autumn, Titaline had recovered. We landed 2 new contracts. The hole left by losing the resort project slowly disappeared. Board by board. Exactly the way every good repair happens. My mother and I didn't speak for a long time. I never slammed the door. I simply stopped holding it open with my own back. Dad called once in a while. Short conversations. Careful words. One afternoon he drove to the coast by himself. He sat with Nana and me on the porch. He hardly spoke at all. For him, that silence said everything. People still ask whether I feel guilty for walking away from my family. I always give them the same answer. Family isn't a bill you're expected to pay forever. It's a door. And I'm done holding that door open for people who only knock when they need something. The ones who knock because they love you. Those are the people you gladly welcome inside. Everyone else can learn to carry their own roof. For 15 years, I was the wall. Turns out, I make a much better porch. If there's one thing I hope you remember from my story, it's this. Setting healthy boundaries isn't shutting the people